Right, so Howard, I gather that back in maybe the late 80s, certainly early 90s, that you were principal designer at the Jaguar facility at Whitley, and as such you were there with all the contemporary names of Jaguar who worked at the time, Jim Randall, Jeff Lawson, etc., and that you played a major part in the development and the oversight of producing this Jaguar XJ40 estate car, shooting brake, whatever you might want to call it. So maybe you want to start perhaps a little bit about the personalities who were there at the time with Jim and Jeff.
I started work at Jaguar in 1987.
Right,
so I think it was some like May, June time, 1987. I was there for 10 years. Those 10 years saw a lot of development in Jaguar. There were a lot of projects, a lot of things going on. XJ220 was on the blocks as well, which was great to be a little bit part of that.
Yeah, amazing.
And as a designer, you're just eager to get into whatever's happening. I was principal I wasn't principal then, I was principal a bit later on X300, but for XJ40 I was sort of looking after the design upgrades, changes, wheels, all that sort of stuff on XJ40. And so this project came sort of under my umbrella because it was part of XJ40. And I do recall working with a chap called Peter Guest, who I think was with TWR, so he was like a contractor, I think, working with TWR, looking at the ins and outs of this.
Oh, right.
So this project in itself was quite an interesting concept. Not that a shooting brake or an estate is a new thing, but for Jaguar it really was a new thing, and there was a bit of resistance because why would you make a functional, practical vehicle out of a luxury car? Why the two sort of didn't really go together. But if you were into your guns, your shooting, your horses, your boats, it was like perfect. And so the brief was what could it look like? And it's easy to do it with pictures, it's easy to do it with drawings and renderings. But I think what's particularly interesting here is that we've got two cars side by side, and we've got, you can actually understand as I say what things happen, because from about here forward it's a standard car.
Yeah.
So the high point of the roof is around here. Now the temptation is to salvage as much of the roof as possible and let it keep going, but if you do that you end up with a very low rear roof. And the idea was to get a balance of this line, this DLO line, this chrome strip that runs all the way around.
Yeah.
I would say very Jeff Lawson in a way. If you look at the XJS facelift,
yes, very
which
much
I
with
was
that
involved
shape
at the
there.
back
Yes,
of this, with
it.
all of this and all the obscuration and all the stuff on that, that's another story. But Jeff was very much into these lines that sort of accelerated rapidly and that you can't quite tell where it starts and stops. And if that's the way it is, then that you've cracked it. If you can make it any feline thing, you're not quite sure where it starts and stops, and that was very Jaguar.
Yeah.
That's what this is about. So the brief was to raise the roof as much as it was required, but not crazily, and then try and get this line to be an unbroken line going all the way through. It meant that the glass had to be raised, the frame had to be raised, so all of this was new roof. And if it's a new roof, it then means looking at a new fender. This is in Jeff's terminology, because he was very American in his words,
ways,
but the rear fender then became standard XJ40, but here is where it blends and becomes into this sort of feline softness. And the rear window too, no sharp points. XJ40 had cornered windows, which Jeff hated, and we all as designers sort of hated, although it was a modern touch.
Yeah.
So this is sort of almost a little bit retro in that the same feeling here goes around the window.
Yeah.
And on this model you can see it's got handmade obscuration. This would normally be a production part but it was a concept.
Yeah.
And I'm trying to remember, the concept model was done in the styling studio, or certainly across the road within Whitley, and that's where these things were done. And then I think it was Peter Guest that ended up then taking this as the first prototype. So this is probably Peter Guest's work within engineering, making it as a finished car. But a sweet looking car.
It's one of those icons of the collection. You only got to look on the internet to see how many photographs there are. If you put Jaguar Estate in, this comes up.
Just to go back to Whitley, one of the things I adored at Whitley was that I was pushed as a front man in front of with Alex Chamberlain, who was product planning and marketing, and all these people. You have to sort of get on your side in order to make something work.
Yeah.
And what's interesting with this is this was a sort of a bit of a fatherless project. And if you have a fatherless project, it's very difficult for that project to actually do well.
Do well and make
you need a
completion.
champion.
You have someone that has to look
and
after it
people
and nurture
liked it. But what was the business case?
Yeah.
What was the deal? Are you going to sell many? Are you going to sell 10? Is it worth it? It's all those sort of things. And later on, when we got into X300, the XJR, which was not a design program right at the beginning, it was a concept within styling of how to make something more desirable for younger people. That champion was sort of us. And we managed to push it through, even though marketing was saying, and the reason I mentioned the XJR on X300 is because this didn't have that sort of champion. And when somebody said, well, how many are you going to make? There's no sort of data, you don't really know, it's a finger in the air. Even with XJR, marketing was saying, we're going to sell 200. It's not enough. That's not enough to make a business case to do the car. And it was Nick Shaler with XJR that said, let's give it a go. It's radically different, the XJR, but then he became the champion, and because he was who he was, everybody nodded. And I don't know how many they sold, but it was like
tremendous
thousands
success,
and thousands.
Tremendous. The whole concept of XJR
and this could
lives
have
through.
This may have been, but less so. I think it was it was still the gentleman's car. It was still the wood and leather, whereas things were moving
on in that regard.
Customers were getting younger. BMW were on the heels, Mercedes-Benz on the heels, and we had to do something different, which is why the products changed the way they did, but worked because of it. So it's great. It's great to see this.
I mean, did you have any particular challenges in creating this and retaining the body strength? Because I can say from personal experience that the car drives very much like a standard saloon. I mean, it's its first drive down today after having been off the road for some 20 plus years, so it was hardly a Grand Prix circuit to get it down here, but there's certainly no real feeling of any body shake or scuttle shake or anything moving at the back end here or anything.
I don't know why, and I'm probably talking out of line because the full engineering is not my thing. But I think that because the structure is so tight, you've got a good pillar, you've got a lot of metalwork around here, you're not changing any of this down below anyway.
That's for sure, yeah.
And I'm not surprised that this would be quite a rigid and probably definitely faster, because the aerodynamics are better than the standard saloon.
Interesting.
Which is what Volvo ended up capitalising on. Volvo became the sort of pioneer of estates that went quicker,
that's for sure,
and raced them. Maybe if Tom Walkinshaw had raced it, he might have gone a bit
different
quicker.
world altogether. We'll get it liveried up. It'll be out next week.
That's good.
Right. So again, going back to the concept of this, I mean, who do you think actually put forward the idea to develop something like this as a program? As a program, yeah.
It would not surprise me that it would have been Tom Walkinshaw. I think.
Interesting.
I'm not. Yeah. I think because he ended up becoming a bit of a champion, and it was his money and effort that was put into it eventually.
Oh, so you're saying this had a benefit to TWR
I think,
association, particularly with your colleague,
Peter
Mr. Guest.
Was TWR, so maybe that's the reason it came. And I think I was only thinking recently, Tom Walkinshaw was the Carroll Shelby of the UK, really, because he was the one who people believed in him. He raced, he won, he had so much force. If he came up with an idea or he fancied something, he would just do it.
Make it happen.
And he's one of the few people who would just do it. He is that sort of character. And this industry is very desperate for people who make those decisions.
Yeah.
You know, the Shelbys, Sir William Lyons. You know,
Yeah.
there is a great example
Quite.
where you have somebody who just does it and just sets it about to do it, and risks all really.
Yeah.
And there are very few people
Who are prepared to
in
do
my
that. Yeah.
lifetime that I've seen that really had the courage to do it. And you in this industry, courage is dangerous, but without it, you don't
can't go
achieve
anywhere
anything.
at all.
You don't.
No, that's for sure.
It's like racing, you know.
Yeah.
You just got
to go for it. I know.
So it's the Walkinshaw Shelby thing. I'm a Shelby man. You have to print that if you don't want. But yeah, I adore the Cobra and all the rest of it. And it was the Cobra that got me a job with Jaguar.
Go on then, please, if you can.
Because I was working at Rover. I'd been graduated from the Royal College of Art. I was sponsored by Rover, and I'd been working in Coventry at Canley for about 2 or 3 years. But I was a little bit fed up. I didn't like the Rover way, and it was a big organisation, and I was doing repeater indicators and mirrors. You know, that's sort
Yes,
of. I did the odd wheel here
yeah.
and there as well. And so I wrote. I'd heard that Jeff Lawson had taken over. I knew that there was a shift to Whitley as a centre for engineering. So I applied. There was no application, but I basically wrote a letter to Jeff personally, and said, "I'm interested in meeting you. I'm a designer. If there are any opportunities, let me know. I'm building a Cobra." So this is back in 1984.
Yeah,
so I was
not
building a
as
replica.
common as they were to do these days by any stretch.
Yeah, so I was building a Jag-based,
Yeah.
a Jag-based AC Cobra. But being a designer and a purist, I wanted it to be as exact as it possibly could. So all the details that you couldn't get things, I had made. It's me. It's just part of what I do. And in the application to Jeff, I said I'm building a Cobra, and I knew he was into big American cars.
Yeah, an Americana
and
in
I was
general.
into guitars. Yeah. I'm into guitars. He was into smoking. I don't smoke. He's into alcohol. I love whiskey. So there were a lot of things that we could talk about, you know. And the application went in, and I didn't hear anything for about a year. Didn't get any response, any reply, and then completely out of the blue, I get this letter from Jaguar saying, if you're still interested, we're recruiting. Could you come and see us? And so I arranged an interview. So I went to the interview, and it was it was Browns Lane, so it's before Whitley was operational. And that's great in that I can remember Browns Lane, and you know got used to Browns Lane because it's such a precious thing. And I remember I'll rewind a bit more. I'd now finished the Cobra.
Yeah.
And it was a beautiful June day, June. It was just gorgeous, no clouds, warm. And I thought, I'm going to go to the interview and I'm going to go in the Cobra. And it was bright red, like a 63 Rosso Ferrari red Cobra. And I drove happily down the A45 from Birmingham to Coventry. And when I got to Browns Lane and turned in, the heart was going. The barrier went up immediately because I think that the guy on the gate saw the car and thought must be management, but I wasn't that old. I was only 34.
Yep.
So I wasn't that old, but the barrier went up, and as I went past him I said to see Jeff Lawson, and he pointed to the block where Jeff's office was, and I could see a 427 red Corvette sitting in the parking lot where all of the directors' cars were parked.
Yeah.
And next to Jeff's car, I knew it was his car straight away, next to Jeff's car was a Space. I don't recall the director's name, but I decided to just put the car in the slot because mine was red and his was red, and the two cars sat side by side, which was great. I went into the interview, and when I was asked into his office, his feet were on the table, a Magnum 427 handgun was sitting next to him,
Yeah.
and he was there reclined in the very Jeff way, and he said, so you're building a Cobra? And I said, no, I'm not building a Cobra anymore. He said, oh, you've given up, like they all do when they start building these projects. I said, no. And I said, is that your 69 Vet outside? And he said, yeah. I said, mine's the 427 Cobra sitting next to it. And he jumped up and he looked out the window and he said, come on, let's go. We spent an hour and 20 minutes
talking about the Cobra and the Vet.
And I knew I got
the job. Yeah, that is the perfect job interview.